My sister died 3 years ago. I was taking care of my little Nicey. But what I discovered next made my blood run cold.
3 years, 36 monthly wire transfers, $81,000, half of everything I earned, sent to my dead sister's husband so he could take care of her little girl. Last month, my 7-year-old niece squeezed my hand with her tiny fingers, pulled me down to her level and whispered, "Auntie, please stop sending him money. Just watch where he goes. You'll understand." What I discovered after that changed everything I thought I knew about the man my sister married. My name is Athena Rowan. I'm 33 years old and I work as an insurance claims processor at a small firm in Roanoke, Virginia. I make about $54,000 a year before taxes, which sounds reasonable until you realize I've been giving away half of it every single month for 3 straight years. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian near Grandin Village. I drive a 2016 Kia Sorento with a coffee stain on the passenger seat that I tried to scrub out twice before accepting it as a permanent roommate. The coffee stain has been there longer than most of my friendships at this point. My older sister Sienna was the person I admired most in the world. She was 34 when she died, a sudden brain aneurysm, completely without warning. She'd been healthy her whole life. She ran a 10K the month before it happened. She was a leasing coordinator for a commercial property management company in Roanoke and made about $68,000 a year. She was the organized one, the planner, the one who labeled her spice rack alphabetically and kept a color-coded spreadsheet for birthday gift ideas. She was also the primary earner in her marriage, which is something her mother-in-law never quite got over, but I'll get to that. Sienna was married to Wade Purcell. Wade worked as a licensed HVAC technician for a regional company and brought home around $42,000. They had a daughter together, my niece Bria, who was 4 years old when Sienna died. When Sienna passed, my whole world cracked down the middle. And Wade, he seemed broken too. At the time, I believed it. He showed up to the funeral looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were swollen. His voice kept cracking. He told me he was drowning. Sienna had managed everything, the mortgage, the bills, the insurance, Bria's preschool payments, the grocery budget, all of it. Without her, he said he didn't even know where to start. So I offered to help. I didn't think about it. I didn't calculate it. I just said yes. I set up a monthly wire transfer, $2,250, every single month. That's $27,000 a year. That's roughly half of my take-home pay. To afford it, I stopped eating out entirely. I canceled every streaming service. I dropped my gym membership. I started picking up Saturday overtime shifts at the office, which meant my weekends disappeared along with everything else. My social life went from quiet to legally deceased. My cat Gerald started giving me this look every evening, like a therapist who knows you're not improving but doesn't want to be the one to say it. But I did it gladly. Every cent, every extra shift, every Friday night alone on my couch eating rice with hot sauce. I did it because Bria was the last living piece of my sister. Bria had Sienna's eyes, that same serious little frown when she was concentrating. I would have sold a kidney if somebody had asked me to. I visited Bria about once a month, usually on Sundays. I always coordinated through Wade or through his mother, Lorraine Purcell. Every visit, the house looked fine. Not perfect, but acceptable. Bria was dressed, clean, smiling. Wade played his role well. Tired eyes, grateful voice, a man doing his best under terrible circumstances. He'd thank me for the help. He'd say things like how hard it was, how much he missed Sienna, how Bria was growing up so fast. I believed every word because the alternative, the idea that he might be lying, was too terrible to sit with. When I called to talk to Bria, it always went through Wade's phone. He'd put her on for 5, maybe 7 minutes. She sounded cheerful, chatty, normal. She'd tell me about school, about a drawing she made, about a squirrel she saw in the yard. But Wade was always in the room during those calls. I didn't think about why that mattered. Not then. Now, about Lorraine. Wade's mother had always been a complicated presence. She never liked that Sienna earned more than her son. At the funeral, she murmured something under her breath to a cousin about how Sienna always had to run everything. But Lorraine wasn't evil. She was stuck. She knew Wade was unreliable, and she was terrified that if she pushed him too hard or said the wrong thing, he'd cut her off from Bria, her only grandchild. So Lorraine kept quiet. She tidied up the house before my visits. She made sure Bria looked presentable. She was the reason the whole thing held together on the surface, not because she was loyal to Wade's lies, but because she was afraid of losing Bria. She was trapped, and I didn't see it. Then came the day everything changed, a Thursday, last month. My afternoon appointment at the office got canceled, so I clocked out at 2:30 instead of 6. I was 15 minutes from Wade's house in Salem. I thought, why not just stop by? Surprise Bria. Bring her a little snack. No big deal. Lorraine answered the door. She looked startled. I'd never shown up without calling ahead, but she let me in. She didn't call Wade first. That was the crack. That tiny, quiet crack in the wall Wade had built around Bria. Lorraine let me in because, deep down, she wanted someone else to see what she'd been seeing. Bria was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up and smiled, but it was a careful smile, the kind of smile a child gives when they're not sure if it's safe to be happy. Her shoes were too small. The canvas was splitting open at the toe. Her jacket, hanging by the door, was a thin windbreaker. This was Virginia in October. The leaves were already changing and the evenings dropped into the 40s. That jacket wouldn't keep a hamster warm. But the worst thing wasn't the shoes or the jacket. It was her eyes. They were too quiet, too still. 7-year-olds aren't supposed to look at you like they're calculating whether to trust you. We spent an hour together. I helped her with math. She showed me a drawing of a cat she'd done in art class. She leaned into me on the couch, and I could feel how thin she was under her shirt. When it was time for me to leave, I hugged her tight. And that's when she grabbed my hand. She didn't just hold it, she gripped it, pulled me down so my ear was near her mouth, and she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it, "Auntie, please stop sending him money. Just watch where he goes. You'll understand." My blood turned cold. Those weren't the words of a 7-year-old. They were the words of a child who had been watching and listening and understanding far more than any child should ever have to. I drove home that night in silence. No radio, no podcast, just Bria's whisper on repeat in my skull. At 2 a.m, I was still awake, sitting up in bed, scrolling through 36 wire transfer confirmations on my phone. $2,250, $2,250, $2,250, 36 times, $81,000, 3 years of overtime and rice and hot sauce and loneliness. And one question I couldn't stop asking myself, where does Wade go? Before we continue, please hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one, and it honestly makes my whole day. Thank you so much for being here. I took a personal day from work, Tuesday. I told my supervisor I had a dentist appointment, which was technically a lie, but at that point, my conscience had bigger problems to deal with than a fake cavity. I drove to Salem and parked down the street from Wade's house, the same ranch-style home that Sienna had picked out 4 years before Bria was born. The house Sienna's credit score had helped qualify for the mortgage on. The house where Sienna had painted the front door sage green because she said it set the right energy. Now the sage green was fading, and the energy it was setting was closer to abandoned storage unit. The porch railing was peeling. The gutters were stuffed with leaves from 2 autumns ago. The lawn Sienna used to maintain so carefully that she once got into a 15-minute debate with a neighbor about the correct height for fescue grass, was patchy and overgrown. The whole yard had the energy of someone who quit a New Year's resolution around February and never looked back. I expected to find something ugly. Truly, I thought I was going to discover Wade had a drug problem or a gambling addiction or something destructive that would explain where $81,000 had gone. Something sad, maybe. Something that would at least make me feel pity alongside the anger. That's not what I found. Wade left the house at 10:15 in the morning. He was not wearing his work uniform. He was wearing a fitted fall jacket I'd never seen before. Dark blue, looked brand new. He got into his truck and pulled out of the driveway with the casual confidence of a man with nowhere important to be and all the time in the world. He didn't drive toward any job site. He drove 40 minutes to Blacksburg near the Virginia Tech campus. He parked at a townhouse complex on a quiet, tree-lined street, the kind of street where people put little potted plants by their front doors and the mailboxes are all the same color. A woman came out of Unit 7, late 20s, auburn highlights, wearing a designer crossbody bag that I later learned costs about $400, which is roughly what I spend on groceries in a month. She walked up to Wade's truck. They kissed. Not a peck, not a greeting. A comfortable, familiar, lived-in kiss. The kind you share with someone who's been in your life for months. Her name was Kendra Feltz. I didn't know that yet. I'd learn it soon enough. They got into his truck together and drove to a brunch spot 2 blocks away. I sat in my Kia Sorento with my hands shaking so badly that I accidentally leaned on the horn. I had to pretend I was waving at someone across the parking lot. There was absolutely no one across the parking lot. Just me, performing for an audience of 0, which honestly summed up the last 3 years of my life pretty well. Here's what broke me. I expected destruction. What I found was comfort. Wade hadn't fallen apart without Sienna. He hadn't spiraled. He'd just replaced his family. He built a whole new life with my money and slotted a new woman into the space Sienna left behind. He was eating Eggs Benedict at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning while his daughter wore shoes that were splitting at the seams. Over the next several days, I started pulling on every thread I could find. I called Bria's elementary school. Sienna, because of course she did, had listed me as Bria's emergency contact when she enrolled her. That meant the school could legally share information with me, especially concerns about a child's welfare. And they had concerns. Bria had 11 absences that semester. The school had been trying to reach Wade, phone calls, voicemails, emails. He responded to exactly none of them. The attendance office told me they were close to filing a report with social services. Then I talked to Patty Gorman. Patty lived 3 doors down from Wade with her husband and her daughter, who was Bria's age. Patty was relieved, almost tearfully relieved, that someone was finally asking questions. She told me that Bria showed up at her house after school at least 3 times a week, hungry. Not, I want a snack, hungry. Hungry like she hadn't eaten since the school lunch that was included in her free meal program. Patty had been feeding Bria dinner on those nights. She said Bria once told her daughter, very matter-of-factly, that Daddy is always at his other house. 7 years old. And she already understood the concept of another house. I traced back Wade's employment. I called the HVAC company where he'd worked for 6 years. They told me he'd left 7 months ago. He wasn't fired, he just stopped coming in. But when I asked more questions, a clearer picture came together. Before he quit entirely, Wade had been reducing his hours for months, showing up late, leaving early, taking long lunches. The decline started roughly 10 to 12 months ago, which lined up with when the relationship with Kendra must have begun. He met someone, started spending more time with her, pulled away from work gradually, and eventually just stopped going. For 7 months, Wade Purcell had 0 income. He was living entirely on my wire transfers, $2,250 a month, money I broke my back to earn, funding a life he was too comfortable to work for. I tried to approach Lorraine carefully. I called her, kept my voice casual, asked how Wade was doing, whether Bria needed anything for school. Lorraine's voice went tight immediately. She said Wade was doing his best under impossible circumstances, and that I didn't understand what it's like to raise a child alone. But then she said something that snagged in my ear like a fishhook. She said, I'm there as much as I can be. I do what I can. That wasn't a defense of Wade. That was a confession. Lorraine was picking up his slack, watching Bria on the days he disappeared to Blacksburg, making sure the house was passable when I came for my scheduled visits, calling Wade to warn him when I was on my way so he could play his part. She wasn't his ally, she was his cleanup crew, and she was exhausted. That same evening, Wade texted me. His tone was calm, almost sweet. He wrote, I appreciate everything you do for Bria, but showing up without letting me know isn't fair to her. She needs stability, not surprises. Let's stick to our normal schedule. It was polite, it was reasonable sounding, and it was absolutely calculated to slam shut the door I'd just cracked open. This wasn't a man in chaos. This was a man managing his operation. Stability. The man who hadn't bought his daughter a new pair of shoes in 6 months was giving me a lecture about stability. I almost laughed. Almost. Then came the phone call from Patty Gorman that changed everything. It was late, after 9. She called because she'd been thinking about it all day and felt like she had to tell me. Last week, during a play date at Patty's house, Bria had said something to Patty's daughter. She said it casually, the way children say enormous things without realizing their weight. She said, "Daddy told me things might change soon. I might go somewhere else for a while." My stomach dropped through the floor. This wasn't just neglect anymore. Wade wasn't just spending my money on his girlfriend and ignoring his daughter. He was planning to get rid of her. He was building an exit from fatherhood, one that would let him keep his comfortable new life with Kendra, free and clear, without a 7-year-old reminding him of the wife he'd replaced and the responsibilities he'd abandoned. I sat on the edge of my bed that night with my phone in my lap and my hands in fists. $81,000. 3 years. And the man I'd been funding was trying to throw away the only thing that money was supposed to protect. I have a storage unit on the south side of Roanoke. It's a small one, 5 by 10, costs me $89 a month, which I've been paying on top of everything else because I couldn't bring myself to deal with what was inside. 3 cardboard boxes, Sienna's personal belongings. I packed those boxes 1 month after her funeral. Wade had called me and said he couldn't look at her things anymore. Her notebooks, her files, the scarf she wore every winter. He said having them in the house was making it impossible to move forward. At the time, I understood. I took the boxes home, realized I couldn't open them either, and drove them straight to the storage unit. That was 3 years ago. I'd been paying $89 a month to avoid saying goodbye. Some people go to therapy. I rented a metal box and shoved my grief inside it. To be honest, the storage unit might have been more effective, but now I had to open them. So on a Saturday morning, I drove across town, unlocked the padlock, pulled up the rolling door, and sat down on the cold concrete floor with 3 boxes of my dead sister's life in front of me. The first box was personal items, a silk scarf that still held a faint trace of her perfume, something floral, something that made my chest ache the second it hit me. A notebook filled with grocery lists in her handwriting, Bria's immunization schedule on a folded piece of paper, a birthday card from Bria, stick figures, crayon hearts, the word mommy in big wobbly letters. The second box was documents, old tax returns, lease agreements from her job, pay stubs, bank statements she'd printed and filed because Sienna was the kind of person who printed and filed bank statements like it was 1997. And at the very bottom of the box, underneath everything else, was a manila folder. On the tab, in Sienna's neat handwriting, 2 words, just in case. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside was a notarized letter, not a formal will. Sienna apparently intended to go through the full legal process, but hadn't finished it before she died. It was a notarized letter of guardianship intent, prepared and signed at Henderson and Wells Notary Services on Campbell Avenue in Roanoke, dated 8 months before Sienna's death. Stamped, witnessed, official. The letter stated clearly, "In the event of my death or incapacitation, it is my expressed wish that my sister, Athena Rowan, assume primary guardianship of my daughter, Bria Purcell." Underneath the letter was something else, 2 handwritten pages, front and back. Sienna's handwriting, small, precise, a little slanted to the right, the way it always was. She wrote that she loved Wade. She wanted that to be clear, but she had discovered that he'd been hiding a credit card debt of $19,000. She found the statements in the glove compartment of his truck, tucked behind the vehicle registration like he thought nobody would ever look there. And this wasn't the first time. 2 years earlier, early in their marriage, she'd found a hidden store credit card with a $6,200 balance. Both times, Wade swore it would never happen again. Both times, Sienna wanted to believe him. But Sienna was Sienna. She didn't just hope for the best, she planned for the worst. She wrote, "I'm not leaving Wade. I love him and I believe people can change. But I need to know that Bria will be protected no matter what happens. If you're reading this, Athena, it means something went wrong that I couldn't control. Please take care of my girl. I trust you more than anyone on this earth. Wade isn't a bad person, but he's weak with money, and weakness has a way of getting worse under pressure." I sat on that storage unit floor and read those 2 pages 3 times. My sister, The woman who alphabetized her spice rack, who kept a spreadsheet for birthday gifts, who once reorganized her entire kitchen because the silverware drawer was inefficient, had written a contingency plan for her own death. She'd seen the cracks in Wade, and instead of pretending they weren't there, she'd built a safety net around her daughter. I could barely keep track of my car keys on a good day, and Sienna had been out here playing four-dimensional chess with the future. She really was the better sister, and she would absolutely hate me for saying that. Monday morning, I called into work, told them I needed a late start, and drove to Church Avenue in downtown Roanoke, the office of Bridget Kowalski, family law attorney, 22 years of experience, mid-50s, short silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a handshake that could crack a walnut. My coworker's cousin had used her during a custody dispute and said Bridget was the kind of lawyer who made opposing counsel suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. I laid everything out on her desk: the wire transfers, the school absences, Patty Gorman's account, Wade's unemployment, the girlfriend, the townhouse in Blacksburg, and finally, the notarized letter from Sienna. Bridget listened without interrupting for 12 straight minutes. I know because I watched the clock on her wall, a wooden clock with Roman numerals that ticked so loudly in the silence that it sounded like a countdown. When I finished, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. She said, "This letter isn't a binding custody order. Your sister didn't complete the full legal process, but what she did is significant. It's a notarized, witness document of parental intent, and Virginia courts take that very seriously in custody disputes. Combined with everything else you've described, the financial misuse, the neglect, the absences, you have a real case." Cost was my next question, because of course it was. I'd been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. Bridget offered a reduced retainer, $2,800, with the understanding that if we successfully recovered any of the misused funds from Wade, her remaining fees would come from that. I had exactly $3,200 in an emergency savings account I'd been nursing since before Sienna died. That fund was supposed to be for car repairs and dental emergencies. Turns out it was actually earmarked for dismantling my brother-in-law's entire life. Fate has a sense of humor. I wrote the check. Bridget gave me one critical instruction before I left. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Keep sending the monthly wire transfer. Do not change your pattern. Do not let him know anything has changed. We need 36 months of unbroken documented transfers when we present this case. The moment you stop, he'll know something is coming, and he'll start preparing his defense." So I walked out of that office with a family law attorney, a dead sister's letter, a nearly empty bank account, and the instruction to keep funding the very man I was about to take down. I drove to work, clocked in for the afternoon, processed 3 insurance claims, and went home to eat rice and beans for the 1100th time. My emergency fund was gone. My savings were at 0, and I had never felt more certain of anything in my life. Bridget's last words to me that day were, "I need documentation of current conditions, proof of financial misuse through legal discovery, and any evidence that he's planning to give up custody. Can you get me more?" I told her I could, because I already knew exactly where to look next. There was a woman in Blacksburg with auburn highlights and a $400 handbag who had no idea where her boyfriend's money really came from, and I had a feeling that when she found out, she was going to have a lot to say. Over the next 2 weeks, I barely slept, but I worked. Not the Saturday overtime kind of work, a different kind. The kind where every hour I wasn't at my desk processing insurance claims, I was building a case against the man my sister married. Bridget filed the custody petition, which triggered something called legal discovery, the legal right to request Wade's financial records. I'd sent him $81,000 over 3 years, and now, for the first time, I was going to see exactly where every dollar went. When the bank statements came back, I sat in Bridget's office on Church Avenue and read them line by line, 12 months of records. Bridget had printed them out and highlighted everything in 2 colors, yellow for Wade's spending, green for anything related to Bria's care. The yellow sections looked like a lifestyle magazine. $16,800 in transfers to an account linked to an address in Blacksburg, Kendra Feltz's townhouse. He was paying her rent. $1,400 a month, like clockwork, $8,400 in restaurant and dining charges, brunch spots, steakhouses, a sushi place in Christiansburg that I looked up later, and where a dinner for 2 runs about $90 before drinks. $4,200 at men's clothing retailers. Not Walmart, not Target, but places with names I didn't recognize because I'd been buying my own clothes at consignment stores for 3 years. And then there it was, $3,100 charged to a resort in Myrtle Beach, a long weekend last April. I scrolled through Kendra's public Instagram and found the photos. Sunset on the beach, cocktails by the pool, the two of them smiling in matching sunglasses like a couple in a travel ad. Posted April 22nd. My wire transfer that month cleared on April 15th. 7 days from my bank account to their beach vacation. The green column, the Bria column, that was empty. I don't mean low, I mean blank. $0 at pediatricians, 0 at children's clothing stores, 0 at school supply retailers, 0 at pharmacies for children's medication. Not a single dollar in 12 months of records that could be traced to spending on his own daughter. I once sat down and calculated how many overtime Saturday shifts I worked to pay for that Myrtle Beach weekend, 127 hours. That's roughly 3 weeks of my life converted into someone else's poolside cocktails. I hope the pina coladas were worth it. Now came the hardest part. Kendra Feltz. I want to be clear about something. I didn't hate Kendra. I had no reason to. She didn't steal my sister's husband. She started dating a man she believed was a successful independent HVAC contractor who was doing well for himself. Wade had lied to her the same way he'd been lying to me, just with a different script. My job wasn't to punish Kendra. My job was to give her the truth and see what she did with it. I sent her a message through Instagram. I kept it short, calm, and factual. I wrote, "Hi Kendra, my name is Athena Rowan. I'm the aunt of Wade's daughter, Bria. I think we should talk. It's important and it's not what you might expect." She didn't respond for 2 days. I checked my phone approximately 400 times during those 2 days, which I don't recommend for anyone who values their sanity or their screen time report. When she finally wrote back, it was cautious. What is this about? We met at a coffee shop in Christiansburg. Neutral ground, public, nothing confrontational. I bought 2 coffees and sat across from a woman who was about to learn that her boyfriend was funding their entire relationship with money stolen from a dead woman's sister, meant for a 7-year-old child. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I put my phone on the table and showed her the wire transfer dates from my banking app. Then I showed her her own Instagram posts. The designer crossbody bag she'd posted on March 18th. My wire transfer cleared March 16th. The Myrtle Beach photos from April 22nd. My transfer cleared April 15th. The watch she'd tagged Wade wearing in a photo last July. My transfer from that month. Right on schedule. Kendra stared at the screen. Her face lost color in stages, like watching a sunset in reverse. She shook her head. She said Wade told her he was an independent contractor. She said business was good and that he sometimes got large client payments. She said she had no reason not to believe him. I told her I wasn't there to blame her. I said, "I just need you to know that a 7-year-old girl has been going hungry while the money I sent to take care of her has been going somewhere else." Kendra asked for time. I gave it. I didn't push. I drove home and waited. 2 days later, she texted me. The message read, "I checked his phone while he was sleeping. I found the wire transfers from your name. He told me those were client payments from a property management account. I feel sick. I'm so sorry." That was the moment Kendra Felt stopped being Wade's girlfriend and started being my witness. And then she told me something that turned my blood to ice. Over the next few days, Kendra and I talked more. She started remembering details she hadn't thought twice about before. Comments Wade made that she'd dismissed as casual. He'd mentioned making arrangements for Bria a few times. He said Bria might go somewhere more suitable. He talked about how Lorraine could take her for a while, and then they'd figure out the rest. Kendra thought it was a co-parenting decision. She didn't realize she was hearing a man plan his exit from fatherhood. I brought all of this to Bridget. She listened, made notes, and then did something I couldn't have done on my own. She made a formal inquiry with the Virginia Department of Social Services, and what she found stopped me cold. Wade had contacted the department 6 weeks earlier. He'd made a preliminary inquiry about the process for voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. He hadn't filed anything yet, no official paperwork, but he'd asked detailed questions. What were the steps? How long it took? Whether the child would go to a family member first or into foster care. It was all on record. My brother-in-law wasn't just neglecting his daughter. He was actively researching how to legally stop being her father. And if he filed before I secured custody, Bria could end up in the foster system, even temporarily. And getting her out would become exponentially harder. Bridget was clear about that. We were running out of time. Bridget accelerated. She filed an emergency motion citing imminent risk of parental abandonment combined with documented neglect. She requested an expedited process, and she arranged a settlement conference, a meeting between both parties and their attorneys in her office to try to resolve the custody question without a full court hearing. Wade was served papers at the Salem house on a Tuesday morning. A process server knocked on his door at 9:15 and handed him the filing. He called me 20 minutes later. His voice was calm, controlled, not panicked, not angry, measured. The voice of a man who had spent 3 years managing a lie and was now reaching for the same playbook. He said, "Athena, I don't know what someone has been telling you, but this is a misunderstanding. I'm Bria's father. You're her aunt. Let's talk about this like family. We don't need lawyers involved." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask him what he spent $3,100 on in Myrtle Beach while his daughter ate dinner at a neighbor's kitchen table. I wanted to read him every line of Sienna's letter and watch him try to explain himself. Instead, I said, "My attorney will be in touch," and I hung up. I forwarded the call log to Bridget. Wade, to his credit as a manipulator, did not panic. He did not disappear. Within 48 hours, he'd hired an attorney, a man named Ray Scuttle, who had a small practice in Roanoke and apparently had availability on short notice, which in the legal world usually tells you something about a lawyer's caseload. Wade was smart enough to respond legally. He thought he could manage this the way he'd managed me for 3 years, through charm, through reasonable-sounding words, through making everyone else feel like the unreasonable one. The man had spent 3 years convincing me he could barely handle packing Bria's lunch, and suddenly he had a lawyer retained in 2 business days. Amazing how competence reveals itself when your lifestyle is on the line. Bridget called me on a Friday evening. Her voice was steady, like always. She said, "Settlement conference is set, October 28th. My office, 10 in the morning." His attorney agreed to the date. Then she said something I've replayed in my mind 100 times since. "When we sit down in that room, Athena, we are not going to argue. We are not going to raise our voices. We are not going to make speeches. I'm going to put documents on a table, one at a time, and let the math speak for itself. Math doesn't lie. Math doesn't get emotional. Math doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. That's how you win this." I told her I understood. But when I hung up the phone, my hands were trembling against the kitchen counter. Gerald jumped up next to me and pressed his head against my arm, which was the most emotional support he'd offered in 3 years of living together. Even the cat knew this was the big one. October 28th, 10 in the morning. Bridget Kowalski's office on Church Avenue. The conference room was small, rectangular wooden table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher in the center with 4 glasses turned upside down, fluorescent lighting that hummed faintly, the way it does in places where serious things happen to ordinary people. There was nothing dramatic about the room. No dark wood paneling, no flags, no gavels, just a table, some chairs, and the quiet hum of that light. On one side, me and Bridget. Bridget had a binder on the table in front of her, thick, organized, tabbed in color-coded sections. She placed it on the table the way a chess player places a queen on the board, not aggressively, just with the calm certainty that the game was already decided. On the other side, Wade and Ray Scuttle. Wade was wearing a button-down shirt I hadn't seen before, probably from the same clothing stores that showed up on his bank statements. He looked composed, not worried. He had the face of a man who believed he was about to talk his way out of a problem the way he'd talked his way out of everything else in his life. Ray Scuttle had a legal pad and a pen. The legal pad was blank. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Bridget didn't do small talk. She didn't introduce the proceedings or explain the purpose of the meeting. She just opened the binder, and then she started placing documents on the table, one at a time. First, 36 wire transfer receipts. She fanned them across the surface of the table slowly, methodically, like dealing cards, each one printed with the date, the amount, and the routing information. $2,250, $2,250, $2,250, 36 entries, 3 years. She didn't say a word. She just let them sit there. Second, Wade's bank statements. 12 months of records printed and tabbed. The highlighted lines told the whole story in 2 colors. Yellow, $16,800 to Kendra's apartment, $8,400 at restaurants, $4,200 at men's clothing stores, $3,100 at a Myrtle Beach resort. Green, the column for Bria's expenses, nothing. Completely, perfectly, damningly empty. Third, Bria's school attendance records. 11 absences in a single semester. Letters sent home to Wade, emails sent, voicemails left, all documented, none answered. Fourth, Patty Gorman's signed, notarized statement. A neighbor describing how a 7-year-old girl showed up at her house hungry multiple times a week for months, how she'd been feeding Bria dinner because nobody else was. Fifth, the school counselor's report. Behavioral changes. A child who had become withdrawn and quiet. A child who told the counselor that things might change soon and she might go somewhere else. Sixth, printouts from Kendra Feltz's public Instagram. Time-stamped. Correlated with wire transfer dates. The crossbody bag, March 18th post, March 16th transfer. The Myrtle Beach trip, April 22nd post, April 15th transfer. The watch on Wade's wrist, July post, July transfer. Photo after photo after photo, lined up next to receipt after receipt after receipt. Seventh, Kendra Feltz's signed statement, 3 pages, that she had been deceived about Wade's income, that she now understood the source of his money, that Wade had made repeated comments about making arrangements for Bria, and Bria going somewhere more suitable. Eighth, the record from the Virginia Department of Social Services confirming that Wade Purcell had made a preliminary inquiry 6 weeks prior about the process for voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. And last, placed gently in the center of the table, like it was something sacred, because to me it was, Sienna's notarized letter of guardianship intent, and underneath it, her handwritten note. The one where my sister, 8 months before she died, wrote that she loved her husband but didn't trust him with money. The one where she asked me to protect her daughter if anything ever went wrong. The room was silent. Not uncomfortable silence, heavy silence. The kind of silence that happens when there's nothing left to argue. Wade's expression changed in stages. When Bridget started, he looked calm. After the bank statement, something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker. By the time the Kendra screenshots hit the table, his jaw was tight. When the social services record appeared, his hands went flat on the table in front of him like he was trying to keep himself from moving. And when Sienna's letter landed in the center, when he realized his dead wife had seen through him years before I did, something in his face just closed, like a door shutting. Ray Scuttle read through the materials. He took his time. He didn't challenge a single document. He didn't ask a clarifying question. He made no notes on his blank legal pad. When he finished, he leaned toward Wade and said quietly, "Let's step into the hall for a moment." They stood up and walked out. The door clicked shut behind them. I stared at the water pitcher in the center of the table. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Bridget sat beside me, sipping coffee from a paper cup she'd brought from downstairs, looking as relaxed as someone waiting for a bus. I wanted to ask her how she could be so calm, but I already knew. She'd done this before. She'd sat across from men like Wade before. She knew what the hallway conversation sounded like even though she couldn't hear it. They were gone for 11 minutes. I counted everyone. When they came back, Wade looked different. Not angry, not defiant, just empty. Like the energy it took to maintain the lie for 3 years had been the only thing holding him together, and now that it was gone, there was nothing left. Ray Scuttle spoke first. His voice was professional, neutral. He said, "My client is prepared to discuss terms." I'll never know exactly what Ray told Wade in that hallway, but I can guess. He probably said that fighting this would trigger a criminal referral for wire fraud, that the evidence was not arguable. It was arithmetic, that any judge who saw this file would not just grant me custody, but would do so with prejudice, that the best outcome Wade could hope for was the one sitting on the table right now, a negotiated agreement instead of a courtroom demolition. Whatever he said, it worked. The terms were straightforward. Wade agreed to voluntarily transfer full legal and physical custody of Bria to me. He agreed to a restitution schedule for the $81,000, structured payments with wage garnishment applying the moment he became employed again. If he missed payments or violated any term of the agreement, the criminal fraud referral that Bridget had already prepared would be filed with the district attorney's office. Wade retained supervised visitation rights, 1 visit per month, with a court-appointed supervisor present. Bridget had insisted on this, not because Wade deserved it, but because she said it made me look reasonable rather than vengeful, and it was what a judge would order anyway. Wade picked up the pen. He signed slowly. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Bridget. He didn't look at anyone. He signed the papers with the same hand that had cashed 36 wire transfers meant for his daughter and spent them on restaurant brunches and resort weekends, and a designer bag for a woman he'd been lying to. I thought about asking for the pen as a souvenir, but Bridget had already moved on to the next page. When it was done, Wade stood up. He walked through the conference room, through the lobby, and out the glass front door of Bridget's office without saying a single word. Ray Scuttle shook Bridget's hand, a professional courtesy between attorneys, gathered his blank legal pad, and followed. The room was empty. Just me and Bridget and a table full of documents and 4 untouched glasses of water. Bridget looked at me. She didn't smile. Bridget wasn't the smiling type, but she nodded once and said, "Bria's yours." I didn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for that later. What I felt wasn't sadness or relief or joy. It was something quieter, something I hadn't felt in 3 years, like I could finally breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs without something pressing against my chest. That afternoon, I drove to Bria's school. I pulled into the pickup line at 3:15. When Bria came through the double doors with her backpack, the same thin backpack she'd had since kindergarten, she looked at the line of cars. She saw my Kia Sorento, and her face did something I hadn't seen in months. She smiled, not the careful smile from the unannounced visit, a real one, full, bright, with her eyes crinkling at the corners the way Sienna's used to. She ran to the car and climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in with the focus of someone who had been waiting for this moment without knowing it was coming. She looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, "Are we going home, Auntie?" I nodded. "Yeah, baby. We're going home." Before I finish this story, if this channel has become a little part of your day, I'd love it if you hit subscribe and drop a like. It takes 1 second, but it honestly keeps me going. I'm grateful for every single one of you. The custody transfer was finalized in 60 days, just before Christmas. The paperwork went through on December 23rd, which meant that for the first time in 3 years, Bria woke up on Christmas morning in a home where someone had actually bought her presents with their own money and wrapped them by hand at midnight, while a cat kept trying to sit inside the wrapping paper. Gerald, for the record, did not handle the transition gracefully. He spent the first week on top of the refrigerator, staring down at Bria with the expression of a landlord who just discovered an unauthorized subtenant. By week 2, he had migrated to the back of the couch. By week 3, he was sleeping on the foot of Bria's bed. He never acknowledged the shift in loyalty. Cats don't do apologies. We turned the corner of my living room, the spot next to the window that catches the afternoon sun, into Bria's space. A small bookshelf from the thrift store on Williamson Road, a desk lamp with a yellow shade that Bria picked out herself, her crayons and markers organized in a coffee mug that says, "World's Okayest Aunt," which I bought as a joke and which Bria took completely seriously. So now it's a permanent fixture. The $2,250 a month that used to disappear into Wade's bank account now goes directly to Bria. New shoes that fit, a winter coat rated for Virginia weather, not a windbreaker designed for a mild September afternoon, school supplies, a Saturday morning art class at the community center in Grandin Village, where Bria paints mostly cats and the occasional tree. Gerald served as an unwilling model for one session and has refused to make eye contact with me since. I still eat simply. That's a habit 3 years in the making, and some habits stick even when the reason for them changes. Oatmeal every morning with cinnamon and sliced banana costs about 40 cents a bowl and keeps me full until lunch. I started that routine when I was trying to save every spare cent for Wade's wire transfers, and now I keep it because it works and because I kinda like it. Some things don't need to be expensive to be exactly right. But now when I make it in the morning, there's a little girl sitting across from me drawing pictures while her oatmeal gets cold because she's too focused on getting Gerald's whiskers right. And that 40-cent breakfast feels like a feast. With the wire transfers stopped and the legal fees settled, I started rebuilding my savings. I'll probably never be rich. That's fine. I have a steady job, a one-bedroom apartment that's a little crowded now but full in a way it never was before, and an emergency fund that's slowly climbing back up from zero. Stable, that's the word. I hadn't felt stable in 3 years, and it turns out stable is pretty wonderful. Wade moved in with Lorraine after the settlement. The restitution payments started small. He had to find employment first. He picked up part-time HVAC work with a different company about 6 weeks later. The payments come out of his wages automatically. Whether I'll ever see all $81,000 back is uncertain, but the repayment order is enforceable, and the criminal fraud referral sits in Bridget Kowalski's filing cabinet like a loaded weapon that never needs to be fired as long as he keeps his end of the agreement. Kendra blocked Wade on everything the day after the settlement conference. His social media went dark within a week. I don't know what his life looks like now, and honestly, I don't spend time thinking about it. This was never about destroying Wade. It was about getting Bria out. Something I didn't expect happened about 3 weeks after Bria moved in. Lorraine Purcell called me. Not Wade, Lorraine. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller. She didn't defend Wade. She didn't make excuses. She just asked if she could see Bria. I said yes, because Lorraine is Bria's grandmother. Because Lorraine spent 3 years trapped between a son she couldn't control and a grandchild she didn't want to lose. Because this was never about punishment. It was about putting Bria somewhere safe. And Lorraine, despite everything, loved that little girl. Lorraine came over on a Sunday afternoon. She brought homemade sugar cookies, the kind with the sprinkles that Bria apparently used to help her make back when she spent time at Lorraine's house. Bria ran to the door and hugged her. They sat on the couch together and watched cartoons and ate cookies while I pretended to clean the kitchen. At one point, I glanced over and saw Lorraine wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, very quietly so Bria wouldn't see. We didn't talk about Wade. We didn't need to. Bria's school called me 6 weeks after she moved in. Not a problem call, a good one. Her teacher, Mrs. Calloway, sent an email that I read 3 times and then saved in a folder on my phone. She wrote, "I wanted to let you know that Bria has been a completely different child. She participates in class. She laughs. She brought a drawing for our bulletin board last week and was so proud of it. I don't know what changed at home, but whatever it is, thank you. Perfect attendance since the move. Not one absence. Not one. Bria sleeps through the night now. She didn't before. I learned this gradually. Not all at once the way children reveal things. In pieces, over weeks, through small comments at bedtime. She told me she used to lie awake in the Salem house listening for the sound of Wade's truck pulling into the driveway. Sometimes it came late, after midnight. Sometimes it didn't come at all. A 7-year-old lying awake